What up, people? I'm back. Yes, I am alive and well. Sorry that I've been off for a while. Just had some crazy life stuff going on, but I have another word of the day. And it's coming from Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 to 16. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. It says, "So then, since we have a great priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weakness, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly before the throne of our gracious God. There we will find his mercy and will find grace to help us when we need it most." So love this verse. There's so much in here to unpack, so let's just get right into it. So verse 14 says, so then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. And I like a point that BibleRef.com makes, which says, since Christ, the founder of our salvation, understands our condition, we have every good reason to maintain our faith in the face of struggle. So in other words, since Christ understands our condition because he went through everything and experienced everything as we did as men, as this passage says, we have every reason to put our faith and trust in him even during our struggles, because we know that he went through it all, and it's not just the case of like he kind of just seeing things from a distance. No, he actually went through all that we experience, and so this is why we can put our faith in him. Verse 15, it says, this high priest of ours understands our weakness, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. I like that the NIV says we do not have a priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. I like that word empathize, because it tells me that it's not just a matter, again, of God simply understanding from a logical or distant point of view. He can literally identify with our feelings because he experienced them all himself. And the fact that he was tempted in every way yet did not sin, this is the most important part of that verse, because it shows us the power and strength of God. It also shows us what distinguishes God from man, which is that he is righteous and holy. Because unlike man, who gave into temptation all the time, hello, myself included, he didn't. And that is what distinguishes God from being, like a full human, like we are. So although he was human, he was still God, although he wasn't a human body. And I said this also proves how much more we could trust God and how much we need him, and how he is the only one who we can rely on for strength, because he's the only one who has come into the world, faced temptation, and yet conquered it. He didn't give it to temptation not once. So that proves even more that he is the person for the job of carrying us through anything. Nobody else could do that for us. BibleRef.com again says that this verse also clarifies an extremely important point about the nature of sin, namely that the experience of temptation is not a sin. In other words, the feeling the law of sin is not a sin. And I think that this is very important, because this is a lie that I realized the devil was trying to trap me into recently too. That because I experience a temptation, that is like I'm already sinning, when it's not true. If you look at Jesus, he experienced temptations of all kinds, yet he did not sin. So experiencing the law of sin is not a sin. The moment it becomes sin is when we act upon it, which is what BibleRef says in this other point that I'm about to read. It says, the fact that Christ experienced the temptation to sin but was sinless is monumentally important for our understanding of the gospel. Too often we categorize sins, usually the ones that we are not personally prone to. We categorize those sins by which only really bad people are tempted. So let's say murder is not a temptation for me personally. So because I don't experience that personally, I say, okay, only bad people, like, murder. or something like that. I chose the one of the ones that we put on the high end of this hierarchy of sin that man created, which again, we created that. To God, sin is sin. Anything that misses God's mark of perfection and holiness is sin. That includes the little sins that man has deemed little, like gossiping, lying, being angry. Those are all sins. So, yeah. So Bible Ref again, continuing with their point. It says that rather than helping others recognize the difference between temptation and action and guiding them to react in a godly way, we act as if being tempted is sin itself. And I think that's very true. So another point that I made to myself here is that how was Christ able to resist acting upon temptation? Well, it was because he abided in God, he hid his word in his heart, and he relied on him for strength. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says this, and this is the New Living Translation. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. Now, some people have a problem with this. Because when it says that God will not allow us to be tempted more than we can stand, some translations say that he will not allow us to be tempted more beyond we could bear. Some people think that it means that we won't feel like that. Like we won't feel like the temptation could be more than we can bear. It never says that. The temptation will always feel like if we can't bear it. Okay? So that's not what it's saying. What it's saying, like this is another way of thinking of what that passage is really trying to tell us, which is that there is no temptation that we can't say no to. There is no temptation that could force us to do anything because we always have the power to choose. We choose to act on the temptation or not, whether it comes. And I think this is where people have a problem with this part of the scripture, because the underlying conviction, I think that's what it does for people. It convicts them because it makes them realize that they are forced to take responsibility of their actions. We can't just say, "Oh, it was a temptation that made me do it." The temptation came from me to be sexually impure, and so I did it. The temptation came from me to gossip, and so it made me do it. No, you had the choice on whether or not to act upon that temptation. You can't stop temptation from coming. The devil out here wilding, doing his job very well, which I wish he wasn't so good at his job. I just want to strangle him. But, we can't escape that. But we can choose whether we act upon our temptations or not. That's on us. And we need to accept responsibility for that. So again, when it says that we won't be tempted beyond we could bear or we could stand, it's true. God will never set us up for failure. He won't do that. He's not a bad father. He always sets us up for success. And when he says that he will not allow us to be tempted more than we can stand, it's because his spirit is inside of us and empowers us to do what pleases God. It says that in Galatians 5, verse 17, and I'm reading from the easy to read version. It says, the sinful self wants what is against the spirit, but the spirit wants what is against the sinful self. They are always fighting against each other so that you don't do what you really want to do. If you are a believer and you know God's word and his truth, you know that this is true. And whenever you are faced with a temptation, you are caught in this struggle of, okay, I want to do this, but I know it's not pleasing to God. And so there is this constant conviction inside of you of like, I want to do this, but I don't want to do this. But the Spirit is in there warring with us and enabling us to make the decision, if we choose to exercise our free will, to do so and to obey God instead of our lust. So, verse 16 ends off by saying, so let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There he will receive mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So we have to come boldly before God, where we can find grace and mercy when we need it most. And I think this is the ironic thing, at least with Christians, and I'm speaking for myself and being transparent, is that sometimes I feel like I at least have the temptation to run away from God when I mess up, because I feel like if I go to Him, I'll be met with fear of judgment, because that is what man do, including Christians. Unfortunately, the church, the universal church I'm talking about, I still feel like we have a long way in actually walking out grace and love for other people. We preach about those things inside the church, but when it really comes to it, when we have to extend that to other people, not even just unbelievers, even fellow believers in the church, oh come on. If you're Christian and you have grown up in the church, especially all your life, you know what, have the gossipers and the people in there who'll be like, ooh, good, you hear what so and so do? Yeah. I hear she do so. You can believe that? And it's just like a bunch of gossip. And when the person comes back, they already hurting. They already convicted. They already probably judging themselves, shaming themselves. And you come in here and heaping no judgment upon them. Like, what was that one? You know, where's the grace? And I think that because we fear that is a reaction of man, again, including Christians, that we think God is that way, but God is not man. His ways are not our ways. God will always meet us with unconditional love and grace. And so that is why He tells us to come boldly. Come to my throne of grace, where you will receive mercy and grace in the time when you need it most. In the time when we need it most, that's when we need to go to God. In the times when we're struggling the most, we need grace, y'all. We need grace, and you can only find it at His throne. The point that I made here was that God knows everything anyway. He knows our thoughts before we even think them, so we might as well confess them so that we can receive His grace and mercy. When we keep everything to ourselves, what we do is allow the enemy to use our guilt against us and turn that guilt into shame and judgment, which is not what God wants us to do, because we allow those things to pull us away from God. And so anything we leave back for the enemy, He uses as ammunition for us. I remember God giving me that analogy a few months ago, earlier this year, when He just convicted me to, pour out all my raw emotions to Him, because He's not afraid from them. He's not surprised by them, right? God is never surprised. I'm going to say that again. God is never surprised by anything. So let's just go to Him and pour everything out. Whatever we leave back, again, inside of our hearts that we haven't poured out to God, we are leaving. Those things become ammunition for the devil to beat us over the head with it. Whatever it is, guilt, shame, remorse, unforgiveness. He turns all those things into resentment and bitterness and again, condemnation. And then those things become weapons that are used against us to draw us away from God. So don't leave anything behind for the devil to use as ammunition. Okay? Boldly approach the throne of grace. It will always be grace. Okay? So that's it. Word of the day.